The worst moment of my life wasn't when I started drinking. It wasn't when I ruined my future. It was the night I looked into my father's eyes and realized he no longer believed a single word I said. Not because he hated me, but because I had broken the same promise too many times. My name is Emily. And a few years ago, I almost lost the only person who never gave up on me, my father. For most of my life, my dad was the calmest person I knew. Even in the middle of chaos, even when everything around us seemed to be falling apart, he carried this quiet strength that made me feel safe. He never shouted. He never punished me the way other parents might have, with anger or fear. When I messed up, whether it was a bad grade, a careless mistake, or something much bigger, he didn't raise his voice or make me feel small. Instead, he would quietly sit beside me, sometimes just putting a hand on my shoulder and say, "Let's figure out how to fix this." There was no judgment in his eyes, only patience and love. Growing up with him, I believed something dangerous, something I didn't realize at the time. That no matter what I did, no matter how badly I failed or hurt him, my father would always forgive me. I took that for granted, thinking his love was unbreakable, never understanding that even the strongest hearts can grow tired if tested too many times. The drinking started during the worst year of my life. At first it felt harmless, a glass to calm the nerves, a sip to quiet the constant noise in my head. But one glass turned into two, two into three, and before I knew it, nights blurred into a haze I couldn't escape. Every time I reached for the bottle, I felt like I was running from myself, from the weight of all the mistakes, the failures, the endless pressure I could never quite explain. But alcohol didn't numb me. It changed me. It made me sharp, angry, volatile. The smallest disagreement with my father became an argument I couldn't control. Words I shouldn't have said spilled out, full of bitterness and regret, and sometimes I crossed lines I would never have thought possible. And yet he stayed. My father, the calmest man I had ever known, stayed. He didn't shout, he didn't storm out. He didn't give up at first, but addiction has a way of turning patience into exhaustion. Nights of yelling, mornings of apologies, promises made and broken. It all piled up silently in the corners of his eyes. And then one night, after another fight that I barely remember, he looked at me in a way I will never forget, quiet, almost trembling with something I couldn't name. "Emily, if this continues, I don't know how to help you anymore." That was the first time fear crossed his calm, gentle face. And for the first time, I realized the full weight of what I was doing, not just to myself, but to the only person who had never stopped believing in me. Then he asked me to promise something. Not just any promise, a pinky promise. In our family, pinky promises weren't childish gestures. They were sacred, a bond of trust that could never be broken. My dad held out his hand, calm but firm, and said, "Promise me you'll stop drinking." I looked into his eyes full of hope, exhaustion, and a quiet fear I hadn't noticed before, and I locked my pinky with his. "I promise," I whispered, almost afraid to speak the words aloud. For the first time in months, there was silence that didn't feel heavy. There was a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. And for a while I kept that promise. I stopped drinking. Nights that used to be consumed by bottles and regret became calm again. We laughed at dinner, we talked late into the night, and slowly the walls between us started to crumble. My father smiled like he used to when I was a child, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could fix myself. But even in that fragile recovery, life doesn't wait for healing. Every step forward felt like walking on ice. One wrong move and everything could shatter. I felt the weight of my failures lurking behind each calm moment, waiting for me to falter. And deep down, I knew that no matter how carefully I stepped, one mistake could undo all the trust I had fought so hard to regain. But life has a way of testing promises when you're weakest. 4 months ago, my grandfather passed away. My dad's father, his best friend, the man who had quietly guided both of us in ways I never fully appreciated. Watching my father grieve, seeing the cracks in his calm armor, broke something inside me. The pain felt unbearable. Nights were too quiet, too heavy, and I convinced myself that one drink, just one, couldn't possibly hurt. I told myself I deserved it. I told myself I was strong enough to control it. But the moment the first sip touched my lips, control slipped through my fingers like sand. One glass became two, two became three, the room spun. Words I would never remember spilled out. And by the morning, I had broken the pinky promise I had clung to like a lifeline. I expected him to yell. I expected anger, disappointment, a flood of emotion, but he didn't. He just looked at me with that quiet, steady calm and said softly, Just don't undo all the progress you made. And that forgiveness, that patience, it cut me even deeper. It made me feel guilty in a way anger never could. I should have felt relief, but instead I felt the crushing weight of how easily I could break the trust of the only person who had never given up on me. Weeks later it happened again. And then once more, each time I apologized, each time I promised it would never happen again. Each time I watched a little more hope leave my father's eyes. Until one night after my last explanation he didn't argue. He didn't lecture me, he didn't even sigh. He just nodded quietly and said, "What's done is done." That was the moment I realized something had changed forever. The moment I realized the truth, my chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt before. My father still spoke to me, he still asked if I had eaten. He still comforted me when I cried over my grandfather. But the spark, the hope that had always lived in his eyes, was gone. I had taken it for granted, thinking love alone could erase my mistakes. But I was wrong. Love could forgive, but trust could fade. And now, sitting across from him, I saw it clearly. The man who once believed I could overcome anything, who had stood by me when no one else would, no longer believed in me at all. It wasn't anger that hurt the most. It wasn't disappointment. It was the quiet, the stillness, the unspoken understanding that some damage can't be undone with words, that even a lifetime of apologies cannot always rebuild what has been broken. And in that silence, I felt the weight of every broken promise I had ever made. I realized that losing someone's trust doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens slowly, promise by promise, until one day there is nothing left to believe in. I am sober now, completely sober. And though we talk, though we share small moments, the relationship has changed forever. I carry the lesson with me every day, that love is powerful but trust is sacred. And sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we fight not against the world, but against ourselves, and the ones we almost lose along the way. And that's when I realized something painful about broken promises. The worst part isn't the anger that follows. It's the quiet moment when someone who once trusted you completely finally stops believing you will ever change. I'm sober now, completely sober. Our moments together are quiet, changed forever. I thought I had time to rebuild trust, but life doesn't wait. One morning his chair was empty, the coffee untouched. The man who never gave up on me was gone. I had kept my promise, but he would never see it. Sometimes broken promises are only felt when it's too late. The New Yorker that I mean you can be used as an article on this.